It is the 14th cycle of the archival restoration project, and Keth has been assigned to catalog maintenance. This is not glamorous work. Keth is a junior archivist, six-limbed, patient, constitutionally unsuited for anything requiring improvisation. His species, the Lethani, resolved their last internal conflict 4,000 years ago through a 17-page administrative memo. They have not required improvisation since. He is good at his job the way a very well-calibrated instrument is good at measuring, precisely, consistently, and without any particular feeling about what the measurements reveal. His assignment for the 14th cycle is simple. Cross-reference the Terran auxiliary files with the master biological registry, flag duplicates, compress redundancies. The humans have been in the archive for 60 of their years now, long enough that their secondary files have begun breeding tertiary files, which have begun breeding files that exist solely to argue with the tertiary files. Standard maintenance, expected to take 1 cycle. It takes him approximately 4 minutes to find the folder. It is not hidden. That is the first strange thing. It sits inside the Terran Sociological Events Index between Dallas, 1963 and Stonewall, 1969, 2 entries he has already processed, both flagged complex, both manageable. This one is flagged differently. The flag is not a color he recognizes. He runs a query on the flag's classification code. The archive returns a single result, category null, no resolution field. Access requires senior authorization or documentation of accidental discovery. He has accidentally discovered it. He is technically authorized. He opens it. Phase 2, the archive's reputation. Before we follow Keth into the folder, you need to understand what the Galactic Archive actually is, because the building matters before the room, and the room matters before what's inside it. The Archive of Concurrent Civilization spans 47 floors of compressed stellar memory on the station called Meridian Actual. It contains the complete historical record of every spacefaring species ever catalogued, their wars, their philosophies, their agricultural innovations, their inexplicable aesthetic choices. The Vorath get 12 lines. They arose, they conquered 4 systems. They discovered a philosophical framework that made conquest feel pointless. They dissolved. Clean entry. 1 footnote, which is just a pronunciation guide. The Sundering Collective gets 4 paragraphs. They are more complicated, a hive intelligence that fractured into subintelligences, briefly went to war with its own components, then recombined. Tragic. Resolved. The entry ends. Humans get 847 volumes. This alone would not be remarkable. Humans are complicated. Everyone who has spent more than a cycle reviewing the Terran files knows this. The volume count is high but not unprecedented. The Markai have 600 volumes, mostly because they invented 17 distinct legal systems in the span of 2 centuries, and then used all 17 simultaneously. Volume count is not the issue. The issue is the footnotes. The Markai have 200 footnotes across their 600 volumes. Informative, well-organized. The footnotes agree with each other. Humans have 12,000 footnotes across their 847 volumes. The footnotes do not agree with each other. Several of the footnotes have filed formal objections to other footnotes within the same document. One footnote, footnote 7841, in volume 312, regarding the period humans call the Reconstruction era, contains a sub-footnote that begins with the phrase, "The preceding footnote is not wrong so much as it is catastrophically incomplete," and the distinction matters, and here is why it matters, in 47 points. Keth has reviewed the Markai files. He has reviewed the Vorath files. He has reviewed the complete historical record of a species that communicated exclusively through regulated bursts of ultraviolet light and still managed a cleaner archive than this. He is not, in other words, unprepared for complexity. He is unprepared for Detroit. Phase 3, The machine what the Terran Oversight Bureau does. The Terran Oversight Bureau was not created because humans are dangerous. This is a common misconception among junior archivists, and Keth held it himself until approximately the third cycle of his assignment. The TOB does not exist to protect the galaxy from humans. Humans have been model signatories. They show up to treaty negotiations slightly underdressed and occasionally bring food no one else can eat. But they sign things and they mean what they sign mostly, in the ways that count. The TOB exists because human history does not behave correctly. Every other species in the archive follows a legible arc: conflict, resolution, evolution, stability. Even the tragic ones, even the species that destroyed themselves, follow the arc to its end. The arc ends. The entry closes. The archive files it. Human history does not end. It does not resolve. It does not achieve stability and remain there. It cycles. It ruptures. It produces atrocities, and then, from the same population in the same generation, sometimes in the same city block, produces extraordinary moral clarity about those atrocities. It generates systems of profound organized cruelty and simultaneously generates the people most precisely shaped to dismantle those systems. It does not do these things sequentially. It does them at the same time. The TOB's first director, a Lethani, as it happens, which Keth finds professionally mortifying, wrote in her founding document, "The Terran files cannot be closed because the Terrans have not finished. The danger is not that they will destroy us. The danger is that we will conclude something about them before they have concluded something about themselves, and we will be wrong in ways that matter." The folder labeled Detroit, 1967, is the purest expression of this problem. The last 3 senior archivists assigned to review it requested immediate reassignment upon completion. One requested transfer to the Extinct Species Division. One took early retirement. The third submitted her review, which was 17 pages long, and then submitted a second document that was also 17 pages long and consisted entirely of the phrase, "I don't know," repeated, with varying punctuation, 847 times. Keth reads all of this in the entry header. Then he reads the folder. Phase 4, KTHOPNS, the folder. The entry begins cleanly. Detroit, Michigan, North American continent, Earth, Sol system. July 23, 1967. Urban population at time of event, approximately 1.6 million. Dominant demographic in affected area, African American, human subcategory defined by enforced ancestral origin and subsequent systemic classification. Event classification, see footnote 1. Keth checks footnote 1. Footnote 1 says, riot. Footnote 1 says, footnote 1's use of the term riot reflects the classification preferred by the governing authority at the time of the event, and does not constitute archival endorsement of that framing. Footnote 1b says, footnote 1a's characterization of footnote 1 as a framing issue is itself a framing choice and should be noted as such. Footnote 1c says, really. Footnote 1c has 41 subcitations. Keth sits back on 3 of his 6 limbs. He has been in the archive for 11 cycles. He has reviewed the complete sociological event record of 31 species. He has never, not once, seen a document argue with itself in the first 4 lines. He keeps reading. Phase 5, the city before. To understand what happened on July 23rd, the entry tells him he must first understand what Detroit was. Keth understands industry. The Lethani built their civilization on the principle of organized collective production. He understands a city that makes things. Detroit made things, more things per capita than almost any other human city in the mid-20th century. It made the machines that made other machines. It made the vehicles that carried a continent. During the event humans called the Second World War, it made the weapons that fed the Allied war effort with such industrial ferocity that one human leader called it, without apparent irony, the arsenal of democracy. Keth underlines arsenal of democracy and notes it for later because something about the phrase is already producing a low-frequency discomfort he cannot yet name. Detroit also made music. This is in the file, cross-reference to a sub-entry on something called Motown Records, founded in 1959, 8 years before the events of July 1967. The file on Motown is itself extensive, a music label founded with a personal loan of $800 in a house on West Grand Boulevard that went on to produce a body of work the archive classifies under cultural output: extraordinary, origin, conditions of extreme constraint. Keth notes that the archive has only 3 entries in that category. 2 are from species that no longer exist. Humans are the third. Arsenal of democracy, origin, conditions of extreme constraint. The discomfort is getting louder. The context file is patient with him. It explains, with the flatness of archival language attempting to describe something that resists flatness, what Detroit's African-American population actually lived inside: residential segregation enforced by policy and by violence, employment discrimination operating as unofficial law, a police department that patrolled black neighborhoods with a unit its own members called the Big Four, which the context file describes in 2 sentences and then footnotes 11 times, the footnotes growing progressively shorter until the last one, footnote 11, which is simply, "They knew." Keth's species resolved their last internal contradiction in 40 years. A philosophical memo, 17 pages, done. Humans had been living inside theirs for centuries. Not resolving it, not leaving, not going extinct under the weight of it, living inside a system that was built on their labor and pointed at their destruction simultaneously, and getting up in the morning and going to work in the arsenal of democracy, and making music on West Grand Boulevard and not leaving. He has no framework for this. His species has a concept. It translates roughly as civilizational patience, the capacity to endure slow institutional change. The Lethani are very good at civilizational patience. They will wait a long time for the memo to work. What he is reading is not patience. He doesn't have a word for what it is. He keeps reading. Phase 6, the night of July 23 RD. The immediate cause was a police raid on an unlicensed bar. Keth reads this 3 times. The archive has records of revolutions triggered by assassinations, by famines, by the collapse of entire economic systems. He is aware that human events often have proximate causes disproportionate to their consequences. He has read the entry on a political assassination in 1914 that somehow produced 4 years of industrialized continental slaughter, and that entry broke something small and structural in his understanding of causality that he has never fully repaired. But an unlicensed bar. The bar was called a blind pig. Keth footnotes this term. It means an establishment operating without license, and the phrase itself is in the document without explanation, and he finds that the lack of explanation is doing something to him, some accumulation of unexplained human phrases that each carry the weight of entire systems of meaning he doesn't have the architecture to hold. Arsenal of democracy. Blind pig. The Big Four. He is building a vocabulary for a world he cannot quite see. The raid happens. A crowd gathers. The first bottle is thrown at 3:45 in the morning. What happens next the archive calls, in its main text, a period of civil unrest lasting 5 days. Keth has learned to distrust archival understatement by now. He reads the sub-files. 43 people die. 33 of them are black. Keth marks this. He will come back to this. 1,400 buildings burn. 7,200 people are arrested. The National Guard is deployed. Then the 82nd Airborne. Then the 101st Airborne. The United States government sends two of its most decorated military divisions into an American city to fight American civilians, and the archive notes this in a subordinate clause, tucked between a population statistic and a property damage estimate, as though the subordinate clause is the correct grammatical weight for it. Keth stops reading. He sits with this for a long moment. He is thinking about the arsenal of democracy. He is thinking about men who built the machines that won the Second World War being met, 22 years later, by the army those machines supplied. He is thinking about the particular shape of that, not as a contradiction, because he has processed contradictions before, but as something that doesn't have a name in his language. Something that is both things at once, fully, without resolution, without one canceling the other out. His species has a word for a logical paradox. He is not sure this is a logical paradox. He is not sure what it is. He checks footnote 1 again. Riot. He checks footnote 1c again. Really. For the first time in his archival career, Keth finds footnote 1c to be the most precise document in the file. Phase 7. The FOOTNOTES begin arguing. Volume 2 of the Detroit folder is entirely footnotes. Keth has never encountered a document where the footnotes required their own volume. He opens it with something that, were he Lethani enough to admit it, he would call apprehension. The footnotes are arguing about what the event means. Not what happened. The factual record of what happened is, for once, largely agreed upon. The arguing is about framing, classification, cause. And the question of what the archive is for if it cannot tell the reader what to do with what it contains. One footnote, 3,847 words long, authored by a human scholar named Dr. Sandra Thompson in 2019, argues that the events of July 1967 cannot be understood outside the context of 3 centuries of specific policy decisions, and lists them. Another footnote, 4,100 words, authored by a different human scholar in 1968, 1 year after the events, argues that the events can only be understood as the expression of a grief so old and so total that it had finally exceeded the capacity of the bodies containing it. These 2 footnotes do not disagree with each other. They are describing the same thing from different distances. Keth finds this more disturbing than the arguing. There is a footnote authored by a journalist who was present on July 23rd. It is 200 words. It describes the sound of the first fire. It does not argue with anything. It just describes the sound. Keth reads it 4 times. There is a footnote authored by a police commander who ordered the deployment of a particular unit on July 25th, defending the decision. It is 800 words and confident throughout. It is directly contradicted by 3 other footnotes citing the casualty records from that unit's deployment on that day. The contradicting footnotes do not say the commander was lying. They say he didn't know. They say, and Keth finds this the most quietly devastating archival note he has encountered in 11 cycles, that he didn't know because the system he operated in was specifically structured so that people in his position would not need to know. The system protected itself by distributing its knowledge unequally. The people who knew what it cost were the people paying the cost. Keth sits with this for a very long time. He is thinking about the Lethani memo. He is thinking about how easy it is to write a 17-page document resolving a contradiction when everyone in the room is the same distance from it. Phase 8, what came out of the ash? This is the phase that broke the previous 3 analysts. Not the burning. Every species burns things. The archive is full of burning. Keth himself reviewed the complete record of the Markai civil fracture, which involved the incineration of 3 entire city-states, and processed it in 2 cycles without incident. The burning is not the problem. The problem is what the archive records happening in Detroit in the years immediately following 1967. Because the archive, which is meticulous, which is the whole point of the archive, which cannot help being meticulous, recorded everything. It recorded the organizers, women mostly, the archive notes without apparent awareness that this detail is doing significant work. Women who had been in the streets during the 5 days and then, when the streets cleared, began building. Not metaphorically, physically. Community organizations, tenant unions, food programs, legal aid structures. Footnote 4201 contains a list of 17 such organizations founded in Detroit between 1967 and 1975, their founding members, their founding resources, which were, without exception, almost nothing, and their operational records. 14 of them are still operating. Keth checks the date of the file, he checks the current cycle, he does the conversion. 14 organizations founded from nothing in the ruins of a burning city are, as of the filing of this entry, still operating, more than 50 years later. He sits with this. The archive also recorded the music. This is cross-referenced back to the Motown entry, but the post-1967 music file is its own thing, not Motown, or not only Motown, but something that came out of the specific pressure of that specific rupture. The archive has a category for art produced in response to crisis. It is a respectably populated category. The Lethani have several entries in it. Good entries, Keth thinks, with the faint defensive pride of a species reviewing its own record. The Detroit post-1967 music file is classified differently. It is classified under a category Keth has to look up: cultural output, simultaneous processing. The definition reads, art which does not respond to a historical event sequentially, grief, then expression, but which appears to process the event and produce the expression in the same motion as a single act. There are 4 entries in this category in the entire archive. 3 are from species the Lethani regard as the most philosophically sophisticated in the known record. The 4th is a music scene in a burned city in Michigan. Keth is quiet for a very long time. Then he reads the sub-file on a man named Marvin Gaye, who in 1971 released a record called What's Going On, and the archive's entry on this record is 6 pages long and ends with a note from a previous archivist that reads, in full, I have reviewed the complete cultural output of 37 spacefaring civilizations. I am not certain I have encountered anything braver than this. The note is unsigned. Keth understands why. Phase 9, the people who serve the system. Keth expects by Phase 9 to find monsters. The archive always has monsters. Every species does. The file on the people who designed and administered the systems that produced the conditions for July 1967 is thick. Housing policy architects, city council members, police department commanders, the businessmen who left when the demographics changed and took the tax base with them, the federal officials who approved or ignored or quietly defunded. He has read enough human history by now to have developed a working model of the human capacity for organized cruelty, and he expects this file to conform to it. It does not conform to it. The people in this file are not, by and large, exceptional. This is the thing the TOB found most disturbing, the thing that made the previous director add a 3rd lock to the folder, the thing that is producing in Keth a specific variety of nausea he does not have a Lethani word for. They are ordinary. The housing policy architects believed in orderly neighborhoods. The police commanders believed in effective law enforcement. The businessmen believed in protecting their investments. The federal officials believed in managing competing political pressures. They were not, the archive notes carefully, unaware that the policies they administered caused suffering. They were structured by the system they operated in to experience that suffering as an abstraction, a statistic, a demographic trend, a line in a budget, rather than as the specific weight of a specific human life. The system protected itself by making its costs invisible to the people deciding its costs. and the people deciding its costs led it. Not because they were monsters, because it was convenient not to look. Footnote 6847 contains a single sentence from a city council member, recorded in a private letter written 3 days after the burning began, which the archive obtained from a university archive in 2003. The sentence reads, "I did not know it had gotten this bad." The footnote to this sentence is 2 words. They knew. Phase 10, the government's response. The official record of the government's response to the Detroit uprising is thorough. Keth reads it. Tanks, the 82nd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, a presidential address, a national commission subsequently established which produced a report, the Kerner Commission Report, 1968, that the archive describes as one of the most comprehensive official diagnoses of systemic failure in American history. The report identified the causes. The report named the remedies. The report was received, noted, and substantially not implemented. Keth stares at this for a long time. He checks the implementation record. There is one. It is not long. The archive summarizes it in 4 lines and then footnotes it 11 times, the footnotes growing progressively more exhausted until the final one, which is just a citation to a study conducted in 2017 measuring the economic and infrastructural conditions in Detroit's predominantly black neighborhoods 50 years after the uprising. Keth does not read the study. He reads the footnote to the study, which reads, "The tanks did not end the uprising. The uprising ended when it chose to. The conditions that produced the uprising were not ended by the tanks or the report or the commission or the subsequent 50 years of policy discussion. They were reduced incrementally by the 14 organizations, and the music and the people who stayed, and the people who came back, and the people who are still there, and the ongoing nature of all of this, which is why this entry has no resolution field." The footnote is attributed to the 3rd analyst who requested reassignment after reading this file. It was the last thing she wrote before she left. Keth saves it. He does not know why. He saves it anyway. Phase 11, why the folder is forbidden. The Terran Oversight Bureau classifies things as forbidden for 3 reasons. The first is danger to other species, information that could enable harm. The second is information asymmetry, data whose uneven distribution could destabilize political relationships. The third reason is the one that appears in the founding documents but is never discussed in staff briefings, the reason junior archivists like Keth only encounter in the fine print of access protocols. Classification null, no resolution field, ongoing. Category null does not mean dangerous. It means the archive does not know how to hold it. The folder is forbidden because the Galactic Archive is built on a premise that history is a record of completed things, events that happened, conflicts that resolved, civilizations that rose and fell or rose and stabilized. The archive's entire organizational logic depends on entries that end. An event enters the record closes, the archivist moves on. Detroit, 1967 does not close. Not because the burning never stopped, it stopped 5 days later as the tanks rolled in and the ash settled, and the city went quiet with the specific quiet of a place that has used everything it had. The burning closed. But the burning was not the event. The event is the whole of it. The arsenal of democracy and the blind pig and the Big Four and the 5 days and the 14 organizations and Marvin Gaye and the Kerner Commission and the footnote that said they knew and the study from 2017 and the ongoing nature of all of this. The event is a people built to be expendable who refuse to be expended, not through a single dramatic act of resistance but through the unremarkable daily insistence on continuing, on making things, on organizing, on staying, on producing, from conditions designed to produce nothing, music and art and mutual aid, and the specific kind of moral clarity that only comes from people who have been lied to for a very long time and have decided, with full knowledge of the lie, to insist on the truth anyway. The archive cannot file this. The archive requires a resolution field. Was the conflict resolved? Is the species stable? Did the uprising succeed? Yes, no. It depends on what you mean by succeed. It depends on who's measuring. It depends on which footnote you trust. It depends on whether you count the 14 organizations or the Kerner Commission, whether you weigh the music against the policy, whether you look at 1967 or 2017, or the current cycle, whether you believe that incremental contested grinding moral progress counts as winning or whether winning has to look like the Vorath, arising, conquering, dissolving cleanly into a 12-line entry that ends. The most dangerous thing in the archive is not a weapon. It is an entry that cannot end because the people it is about have not finished. The folder is forbidden because every analyst who reads it in full comes out the other side, no longer able to maintain the professional distance that archival work requires. Not because the content is traumatic. The archive has traumatic content. Keth has read traumatic content. He is Lethani, and he is constitutionally suited to professional distance. Because the content is ongoing. Because the people in the folder are still there. And the archive has no category for reviewing the history of people who are still making it. Phase 12, KTH chart. Keth files his maintenance report at the end of the 14th cycle. Duplicates flagged, 847. Redundancies compressed, 0. He could not find a single redundancy in the human files. Every document that appeared redundant turned out on reading to be saying something slightly different from the document next to it in a way that mattered. He includes a reclassification request for the Detroit folder, not dangerous, not contained, not closed. He proposes a new category, active historical record, entry ongoing by nature. Resolution field not applicable. The request is denied in 6 hours. Fastest denial in his 11 cycles. He suspects the TOB has a protocol specifically for this request, which means he is not the first junior archivist to make it, which means there are others. How many others? Who read the folder and came out the other side wanting to change something about how the archive holds it. He resubmits with an additional 40 pages of supporting documentation. The denial comes back in 4 hours this time. He sits at his terminal in the long quiet of the meridian actual night cycle, and he thinks about Marvin Gaye, who made a record the archive called one of the bravest things in 37 civilizations worth of cultural output. He thinks about the 14 organizations. He thinks about the unnamed archivist whose last filed document was a footnote that ended with the ongoing nature of all of this. He opens a blank document. He does not know what he is writing yet. He is Lethani. He resolves contradictions through administrative memos. 17 pages, done. He is constitutionally unsuited for anything that does not resolve. He starts typing anyway. The document will eventually be 847 pages long. He will not know this for some time. It will contain 12,000 footnotes. Several of the footnotes will disagree with each other. One of them will be just a question mark. He doesn't know any of this yet. He just knows that the folder is still open on his secondary screen, and the entry still has no resolution field, and the people in it are still there, still making things in the ash of things, and the archive does not have a category for this. And that absence, that gap between what happened and what the archive can hold, is the most important thing he has found in 11 cycles, and he is not willing to compress it into a redundancy and move on. He types. The archive hums around him, 47 floors of completed things, and somewhere in the Terran Sociological Events Index between Dallas and Stonewall, a folder with no resolution field sits open, ongoing, waiting, the way Detroit waits, the way the 14 organizations wait, the way everything that refuses to be finished waits for someone patient enough to stay with it. Keth stays,